As U.S. bishops prepare to gather for their annual meeting in Baltimore next week, some prominent Catholics are calling them out. In an open letter to the bishops, Jade Henricks of the Augustine Institute writes, "There is something wrong with how the body of bishops functions. The bottom line is that it sometimes appears that many of you are governed by fear of each other and of the institutional order more than by the fear of God." Henricks is a former senior staffer at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Joining me now is Edward Condon, the D.C. editor for Catholic News Agency. So Ed, is his assessment right? Is that really the problems? And how do you think the bishops are going to respond?
I think he's right. I think this is a pretty powerful assessment. We're looking at a crisis in the Catholic Church in the United States. It's as much about bishops' credibility as it is about sexual abuse at this point. Now, when they meet in Baltimore next week for their annual Fall General Assembly, we know a few of the proposals that they're already discussing and circulating amongst themselves. One of them is a code of conduct for bishops that they're all going to be asked to consider signing for themselves. The other one is the creation of an independent, lay-led investigative body that'll look at accusations that are brought against bishops.
I know a lot of people support that idea. So they sound like good ideas. Do you think they'll work? I mean, is this a step in the right direction?
Well, we hope that any sort of measures that they take will have some positive effects, but as far as it goes towards addressing this problem of the credibility of bishops and the way they relate to each other and account for themselves, no, I don't think it will. What we're looking at really is an exercise in buck passing. They're building an enormous structure in this investigative body that's going to basically police the bishops because they said they can't or won't do it to themselves.
That's exactly what a lot of Catholics are worried about. Another big weak point for some is what's called the Dallas Charter. That's the set of rules put in place after the 2002 sex abuse scandal, exempting bishops from really being held accountable. How should they address this issue, and how can bishops really police themselves?
So this is another reason why some of the bishops are already making noise about how wise it is to go ahead with creating new bodies and structures. Now, the reason the Dallas Charter didn't address bishops particularly last time around was because bishops simply don't have the authority to police themselves or create structures that make themselves accountable to it. That's something that only the Pope can do. And so here again, we're going to be left in the same spot, which is the bishops want to create something with authority over them, but they don't have the authority to create it.
In February, Pope Francis will host all of the heads of bishops' conferences from around the world to focus on the sex abuse scandal. The Holy Father has been faced criticism on his own right for this issue. Some call clergy sex abuse sort of his blind spot. What can we expect?
Well, it's hard to know what to expect. No pope has ever called a meeting of all the heads of the bishops' conferences together before. We know the meeting's scheduled to last about 3 days, so it's unlikely they're going to come up with some sort of earth-shattering solution of their own. I think a more interesting question, which we don't know the answer to yet, will be what will the Pope have waiting for them when they arrive?
And why do you think it's taken so long for Pope Francis to call this meeting? I know some people had said, he should have called this sooner, he should have gotten all the bishops together sooner.
Well, I think if you're looking at holding a global meeting, these things take time to prepare. Usually if the Pope's calling a synod of bishops, for example, there's more than a year goes into preparation. So in this sense, calling it with only 6 months in advance is already, moving fast in Vatican terms. As I say, it's difficult to know what we can expect out of this meeting, but hopefully at least we'll arrive at a point where there's a universal acknowledgement of the problem, because at the moment it's definitely seen as sort of a Western obsession by some dioceses, particularly in Europe.
Okay, we'll be continuing to watching, and I know that you and so many of us will be covering this. Edward Condon, the Washington, D.C. editor for Catholic News Agency, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
And we will have complete coverage, as I mentioned, of the bishops' meeting next week right here on EWTN News Nightly. Ed, Jason Calvi, and I will all be reporting from Baltimore. We'll also be talking to church leaders as well as lay Catholics who are expected to protest.